The ACT English section is 75 questions, 5 passages, so it's 15 questions per passage. You have 45 minutes to do the whole thing, which works out to 9 minutes per passage. This is the one section of the ACT where typically timing is not a problem. So take your time, use the time, and just remember there's no extra points for finishing early. A few things to keep in mind while you go through this section. Number one, read everything. Don't try to cut corners and just go to the questions. You need to read the entire passage. That's where you're learning about the style and tone of the passage, and also where you're learning what the passage is about. And all of that is stuff that you need to answer the questions. When you do come to answer a question, decide on your question, and then I really recommend that you just read the sentence that question falls in one more time. It's easy to start focusing on one little part of a sentence, particularly in the grammar and punctuation, and you forget that section of the sentence has to make sense still with the rest of the sentence. So all of those parts have to fit together. So just read the sentence one more time and make sure you haven't missed anything. There are 2 broad categories of question on this section. There's the grammar and punctuation questions, and then the rhetorical skills questions. Those rhetorical skills questions are things like where you're correcting for style and tone. You'll also do things like the test will ask you if you should add or delete some information, or you might have to rearrange the order of sentences in a paragraph, things like that. So for those types of questions, a few things to keep in mind. Number one, shorter is better. It's not always the case that the shortest answer is the right answer, but it often is. And usually if you're trying to decide between 2 answer choices that both kind of seem right and you're having a tough time, go with a shorter one. It's not always going to be right, but more often than not, it will be. The other thing is that you have a lot of questions where you have to correct for style or tone. And in that case, just remember that the tone of these passages is always somewhere in the middle. It's not too casual and not too formal. The ACT also likes to test redundancy questions, and this is one where they can be hard to catch. And there are ways that the answer choices and the structure of the question can sometimes give you a clue that that's what you're dealing with. I'll address that in another video more specifically. But in general, just be aware of that. And this is something that's, you need to catch the redundancy, you need to read the rest of the paragraph and maybe the rest of the sentence that question falls in carefully, because the initial instance of what becomes a redundancy in the question doesn't show up, shows up somewhere else in the passage. So you need to read all of that carefully. But it's something to be aware of and keep in mind. For the grammar and punctuation questions, the biggest thing is to not trust your ear. The ACT knows that this is how most people do their grammar and punctuation. And so they've come up with questions where trusting your ear doesn't work, because they want to test if you actually know what the rules are and what you're really doing. And so the only way to get these kind of questions right is to know what you're doing and know what the rules are. So you have to learn them. The good thing is that they're not that challenging. It tends to be pretty familiar territory, and then we're just going to sort of solidify your knowledge and maybe clean up a couple of misconceptions and whatever. We'll talk about what a semicolon is for and all that. So this is, it's a project that can be done. It's not too much work, and if you want to score well on this section, it's an absolute must. You need to know those rules. So in general, when you're doing questions, just remember that less punctuation is typically better. So again, if you are between 2 questions and one has less punctuation than the other, you don't know which, kind of having a hard time deciding which one is right, go with the one with less punctuation. It's not always right, but more often than not, it will be. And kind of with that, if you're going to use, if you're deciding to use punctuation in a sentence, you really have to know why. Make sure that you know the rule that demands that punctuation be there. Punctuation doesn't exist just for fun or just because you think that there should be a pause in the way something is read or spoken. There are specific rules that apply to every piece of punctuation. And so if you don't know why the rule that's demanding a piece of punctuation be where it is in the sentence, you probably don't want to use it. And that's really it. That's the basics. There are lots of specific question types that I'll cover in other videos, but I hope that helps.